10 days ago, I encountered a situation that has fundamentally altered my perception of my marital relationship. This revelation involved my wife, with whom I have shared 6 years of marriage, being secretly recorded during a friend's bachelorette party. The recording featured her engaging in intimate interactions with 2 male dancers present at the event. The individual responsible for capturing this footage was another woman attending the party, who utilized her cell phone to document the proceedings without the consent of those being filmed. The twist in this narrative came when the woman who recorded the video chose to confide in her boyfriend about what she had done. This boyfriend is someone who, while not a friend, is familiar to me through our shared connections from high school. Despite our lack of a close relationship, we do have mutual acquaintances. Over time, I learned that this couple made a conscious decision not to disclose the existence of the video, keeping it hidden for several years. However, after their breakup, the dynamics changed substantially. The man began casually sharing the footage with his friends, presenting it as a form of entertainment during social gatherings, such as guys' nights out. It is crucial to note that many of the women featured in the video, including my wife at the time, were involved in relationships when these events were occurring. This has led me to question whether there was an element of mockery directed at me and the other partners present. Although I am acutely aware that such thoughts may stem from my own feelings of insecurity, for years, this story remained unknown to me and my close friends. A month ago, one of our mutual acquaintances happened to engage in conversation with this man over drinks. The topic veered toward the infamous incident, and he began jokingly recounting how his ex-girlfriend had recorded a group of women behaving in a wild manner at a bachelorette party. I learned that my then-girlfriend, now my wife, was prominently featured in this scandalous narrative. The background of the situation revealed that the man exhibited trust issues during his relationship, leading him to closely monitor his girlfriend's activities. Out of a desire to demonstrate her innocence and fidelity, she recorded the events of that fateful day, involving not only herself but also her friends, in an effort to provide evidence of virtuous behavior to quell his suspicions. According to our mutual friend, the original recording took place backstage in the dressing room of the dancers, where the dynamics escalated. My wife, distinct from her friends, engaged in explicit acts with both dancers simultaneously, while the other women participated by performing oral acts and exposing themselves. This explicit encounter was secretly documented by the woman with the camera. Approximately 1 month ago, after gaining awareness of the situation, my friend felt compelled to share this explosive information with me. However, he wrestled with the implications of doing so. He fully recognized the strength of my current marital bond and the love shared between my wife and me, especially considering we are parents to 2 young daughters, aged 3 and 5. 11 days ago, on a Friday, my friend initiated contact with me, expressing a pressing need to discuss an important matter. His tone suggested that the subject was significant, and I initially assumed he was confronting personal challenges requiring my support. Having known each other since high school, our friendship was built on a foundation of mutual aid and understanding. The following day, we agreed to meet at a local bar, where I found him visibly anxious upon my arrival. His demeanor strongly indicated that the issue at hand weighed heavily on him, and I suspected it was related to something concerning me rather than his own circumstances. My background informs my perception of such situations. I hail from a tough neighborhood and stand at 6 feet 3 inches tall. In my past, I have experienced encounters with law enforcement, primarily linked to previous affiliations with a group. This history has imparted a certain reputation, yet I have since made significant strides toward personal growth. My experiences, including prior incarcerations and the responsibilities of marriage and parenthood, have refined my character. It has been over 8 years since I last confronted legal troubles, and I have transitioned into a more composed and mature individual. The transformation in my approach to life is profound, particularly now that I have a family to care for and a stable career as a union electrician. My relationship with one of my friends spans a significant period, reaching back to our high school years. During that time, I often found myself in the position of protector, standing up for him against bullies due to the fact that he is a year younger than I am. Now, at 29 years old and having established a respectable career in the corporate sector, I find that our social circles do not often overlap. This divergence in our social lives meant that when I chose to sit at the bar, I was instantly aware that my friend had something weighty to discuss. His body language indicated that the conversation would likely revolve around me, which stirred a palpable sense of anxiety within me. To ease the tension, I turned to him and asked how he was doing, as well as whether something was troubling him. His response was measured and serious. He indicated that what he was about to share might have significant implications for my relationship with my wife. He expressed that he believed I needed to be informed, as he did not want me to discover this troubling information years later, only to realize that he had concealed it from me. His sense of integrity compelled him to come forward, and at that moment, I urged him to share the details. What followed was nothing short of shocking. He revealed that a few weeks prior, while out with some mutual friends, one of them had shown him a video from approximately 5 years earlier. This video, according to him, depicted my wife in a compromising situation with 2 dancers in a dressing room. Upon hearing this revelation, I was overcome with a surge of conflicting emotions. Anger, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of shame washed over me. My instinct was to confront him, suspecting perhaps that this was a cruel prank. However, deep down, I recognized that the gravity of this allegation felt all too real. I recalled distinctly the day my wife mentioned attending a bachelorette party for one of her friends 5 years ago. At that time, we had been in an exclusive dating relationship for about 7 months, and we had not yet taken the step of moving in together. My girlfriend, who hailed from a traditional Irish Catholic upbringing, was strikingly beautiful, and my affection for her was profound. Therefore, my initial impulse in hearing this news was to defend her honor and reputation. Reflecting on my past temperament, I considered that the older version of myself might have reacted aggressively toward my friend for even bringing such a matter to light. Perhaps this understanding had prevented my acquaintance from disclosing this information sooner, knowing my history of intense reactions. I proceeded to inquire whether my friend had the video in his possession. He informed me that it was located on his friend's phone, claiming he had only seen a portion of it. However, I found this hard to believe, as it is uncommon for someone to view merely a part of such an impactful video. Regardless of this detail, a realization struck me: my friend had no legitimate motive to deceive me with an elaborate joke about my wife's fidelity, particularly when considering the potential repercussions of doing so. Seeking clarity, I asked him how I could get in touch with the individual who possessed the video. My friend assured me that he could facilitate an introduction. He then stepped outside to make a call, and upon re-entering, he informed me that the individual was not answering but had sent a text message. My friend reassured me that he would keep me updated as soon as he received any information. Initially, a wave of urgency prompted me to leave the bar and contact my wife immediately. However, my friend advised that I take a moment to gather my thoughts and refrain from making any hasty decisions. He suggested that I stay and discuss my relationship with my wife, which had been flourishing up until that point. I had never imagined that she might be involved in something so deceitful. Reflecting on the early stages of our relationship, I acknowledged that she had exhibited some signs of a wild streak. However, I had not fully grasped its extent until this moment. After that first year of dating, it appeared that she had transitioned away from that party lifestyle, ostensibly leaving it behind. It was important to note that, although there had been challenges related to her issues with alcohol, she had made significant strides in managing them, primarily motivated by the arrival of our first daughter. Throughout my conversation with my friend, he received a text from the individual in possession of the video. He informed me that he could share this individual's phone number with me. I acted swiftly and called the man, expressing my desire to meet so that he could provide me with the video on a flash drive. He conveyed that he was currently out of town but would return the following week. I emphasized my interest in obtaining a copy of the video and inquired about the compensation he would seek in exchange for deleting it from his phone or any other storage device. I had hoped for a smooth resolution to the situation by getting him to agree to delete the video voluntarily. However, my expectations were dashed when he demanded a staggering sum of $11,500. This demand reinforced my long-standing dislike for him. Through a process of negotiation, I managed to bring the amount down to $11,000. It was puzzling why he insisted on retaining the video, particularly given that my wife and his former partner had long ceased to be friends. It seemed unlikely that his ex-girlfriend would hold it against him. To me, his motive seemed rooted in a desire to be difficult rather than in any legitimate concern. Ironically, I was relieved that he asked for a financial sum, as it provided a pathway to formalizing a legal agreement that would prevent him from ever releasing the video publicly. In doing so, I could designate myself as the sole owner of the only existing copy. My primary goal was to shield my wife, my daughters, and myself from any potential humiliation that could arise from the distribution of a tape featuring my wife. The mere thought of such a video circulating online was deeply unsettling. I felt an urgent need to manage the situation proactively before confronting my wife later on. From what I had heard, the contents of the video were so explicit that even considering its release was daunting. That night, my judgment was impaired by alcohol, leaving me unable to drive home. This forced me to take a rideshare service while leaving my vehicle in the bar's parking lot. Upon returning home, I was in such a state that I could scarcely walk through the front door. The last coherent memory I had was of calling my wife a 403 in a fit of inebriation before collapsing into unconsciousness. The following morning, I awoke on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, suffering from the effects of a hangover. My wife had planned to go to work, but she made the decision to call in, concerned about my unusual behavior and wanting to understand what was happening. She offered me a glass of water as I sat there, and after taking a sip, she inquired about what was troubling me. As I looked at her, the memories of the previous night surged back, and I found myself grappling with an overwhelming wave of anger toward her. The images of her with two male dancers lingered in my mind and rendered me momentarily speechless. Instead, I succumbed to tears, sobbing uncontrollably, an act that felt foreign and humiliating, marking one of the lowest points in my life. My wife's reaction was a mix of confusion and concern. She too began to weep, wanting to console me with a hug, but I instinctively pushed her away. My emotional turmoil began to frustrate her, and she pressed me for an explanation of what was happening. Finally, with a heavy heart and trembling voice, I revealed that there was a video in existence showing her engaging with two dancers at a bachelorette party 5 years prior. The confusion in her expression was palpable, quickly turning to denial as she insisted that the accusations were baseless. She claimed that it could not possibly be true. I reminded her of the specific bachelorette party in question and pressed her to confirm whether she had indeed attended. She acknowledged her presence at the event but vehemently denied any wrongdoing, asserting that the entire scenario was fabricated. In an attempt to probe deeper, I suggested the possibility that she might have been too intoxicated to remember the events accurately. Her response was swift and defensive. She maintained that she would have retained a clear memory had she engaged in any indiscretions with two men. When I indicated that the individual holding the video was currently out of town, the reality began to settle in. Deep down, I truly wanted to believe her version of events. She appeared entirely convinced that she was innocent of any wrongdoing. At the same time, I began to contemplate that this might be an elaborate ploy to extort money from me, although the sum of $11,000 seemed too significant for such a deception. As the days passed, the desire to see the video escalated. I felt an overwhelming need to ascertain the truth and put my mind at ease. The man had informed me he would return to town on Tuesday, and since today was Sunday, I was left in a state of heightened anxiety. My wife's behavior around the house became noticeably erratic. She engaged in numerous tasks as if she were seeking to alleviate a sense of guilt. She persistently inquired about my well-being, creating an atmosphere in which I felt as though I were the one losing my grip on reality or fabricating an outlandish tale. Who would invent such a story, I wondered. By Monday, my patience had worn thin. I communicated to the individual that an immediate in-person meeting was unnecessary. Instead, I proposed sending him the agreed amount of $11,000 through a cash transfer application. In response, he indicated that he lacked sufficient storage space on his current Dropbox account and could not delete existing files to make room for the video. I suggested he create a new Dropbox account, which he ultimately did. By Monday evening, I completed the transaction and awaited a link to the video, feeling a mix of trepidation and anticipation about what I was about to uncover. Upon opening the video, I was confronted by a scene that was both startling and disheartening. A group of women, including several friends of my wife from her past, were gathered together, cheering with vibrant enthusiasm as a group of dancers performed before them. The atmosphere was filled with excitement, yet my attention quickly shifted to something more disturbing. I observed my wife, who was making physical contact with the dancers, touching areas of their bodies through their clothing in a manner that felt deeply invasive. As the footage progressed, it transitioned to the dressing room, revealing a more intimate and compromising situation. There, I saw my wife alongside two other women, both of whom were on their knees, seemingly preparing the dancers for their performance. As I took stock of the scene, I counted approximately 5 men present, clearly indicating a level of intimacy and interaction that I had not anticipated. Another segment of the video shocked me further. My wife was depicted engaging with a dancer, clothed yet clearly involved in an explicit act. 2 dancers took turns in their attentions toward her. The video, although poorly produced and reminiscent of amateur footage, undeniably featured my wife. Beyond the visual confirmation, it was her voice that left no room for doubt. It was unmistakable. This private episode, which I had previously believed was solely ours, was evidently shared with strangers. It cast a shadow over my understanding of our relationship. It seemed that the dancers were aware of being recorded but remained unbothered by the prospect. The extent of my wife's awareness regarding the recording remained unclear, as she and her friends did not acknowledge its presence in the footage. What troubled me further was the realization that my wife was not coerced into these acts. In many instances, she appeared to actively seek attention and engagement, even taking the initiative to participate with the men she had met that night. This was in stark contrast to the image of innocence she portrayed when we first met. During our initial encounters, she adopted a demeanor that suggested she was not easily swayed. Although I did not view her as an embodiment of purity, she never claimed to be such. At that time, she was categorized as a party girl. She made me wait for approximately 2 months before we shared our first intimate moment. Now, all that I thought I understood about my wife is under intense scrutiny. Our bond has always been significant, particularly following the birth of our second daughter. Yet here she was, visibly and enthusiastically engaging in intimate acts with complete strangers, seemingly unreserved and uninhibited. This revelation deeply unsettles me, as I have always believed that special moments should be reserved for those we love. The naivete of that belief feels shattered, leaving me to grapple with its implications on my self-esteem. I cannot help but ponder whether I was somehow insufficient for her in the past and whether that inadequacy persists in our current relationship. I have noticed changes in my physique, as I carry a few extra pounds now compared to when we first met. During that time, I maintained a good level of fitness. I consider myself an attractive individual, yet my mind races with thoughts of her willingly participating in those acts with another man. I am curious if others in relationships have faced similar experiences, as it seems implausible that I am the sole individual to endure such a betrayal. Prior to discovering this video, my perception of my wife was nearly ideal. She has been a devoted mother to our 2 daughters, caring for me and displaying a high level of diligence. These characteristics diverge sharply from the narratives of disloyal or irresponsible spouses often depicted in discussions of infidelity. Over time, she has evolved into a more traditional partner, contrasting with the persona she presented during our early courtship. This transformation complicates my feelings about the possibility of ending our relationship. Regarding the matter of safety, it is evident that protection was utilized during these encounters. However, I am unsure if this fact holds any substantial importance in the grander context of the situation. My wife had always been adamant about the use of protection in our own intimate gatherings. This had, at one time, earned her praise from me. Now, the circumstances prompt a reconsideration of whether our relationship has been built on a foundation of falsehoods. I am left questioning my understanding of her reality and the extent of her past. She had once assured me, swearing on her life, that the individual in the video was not her. Prior to viewing it, I might have believed her without hesitation given her conviction. The moment she returned home that evening, I chose to connect the video to our television. I wanted to ensure she could clearly see the evidence of her actions. My emotions were heightened by anger, prompting an outburst that may have exceeded reasonable bounds. I anticipated that she would demonstrate remorse or plead for my forgiveness. Instead, her response was astonishingly nonchalant, as if she had premeditated her excuses. She boldly claimed that we were not in an exclusive relationship at that time. She even asserted that we were not in a relationship at all. I rebuffed her, aware that she was correct in stating that we were not exclusive at that moment in time. However, there was an unspoken understanding that she was being dishonest regarding the emotional connection she had with 2 men simultaneously. The persona she presented to me contradicted the individual portrayed in the video that surfaced. This raised questions about her authenticity and intentions. Amidst our escalating confrontation, she attempted to shift the narrative by claiming that alcohol impaired her judgment. She suggested that intoxication rendered her vulnerable to exploitation. I pointed out that her actions in the video showed her as a willing participant. There was no moment where she expressed resistance or hesitation. She then claimed the video had been manipulated and didn't represent the complete context. While she continued to blame her behavior on alcohol, I noted that she seemed fully aware of her surroundings. Her motor skills were intact, and there was no slurring in her speech. The barrage of lies and justifications became increasingly frustrating. I was reluctant to argue further, yet her lack of accountability was palpable. She showed discontent with my insistence on addressing this past incident. She asserted that it was irrelevant since we were just friends with benefits then, without commitment. She questioned how I would react if she held my past against me. By stating that she accepted me for who I was, she pressed me to show the same understanding. Although our relationship had never involved violence, her evasions made me feel an agitation I had never experienced. I was aware of my children sleeping in the other room. The last thing I wanted was to disturb them with our argument. It became clear that I needed to remove myself from the situation. I gathered some clothes and decided to stay with a friend and coworker. I knew I shouldn't act rashly in anger, especially given my probation status. After leaving, I confined myself to my friend's home, needing space to calm down. During this time, my wife repeatedly called, asking me to return, but I ignored her. I knew a confrontation awaited, and my anger kept me from facing her. Her texts expressed discontent, accusing me of not forgiving her past. She also compared my inability to forgive with my own history. My past included almost a year in prison for aggravated assault and 10 years of probation, which affected my life progression. Despite her potential as a physical therapist, my work as a union electrician provided a more stable income. In that moment, my marriage felt trivialized, and I questioned her true identity. I never believed she was flawless when I proposed, knowing everyone has secrets. But this one felt too big to overcome. From the beginning, I was aware of her past but had naively accepted her story, thinking she was a typical party girl. I recalled asking her about her sexual history. She gave me a number that I suspected was lower than the truth. After learning of other relationships post-bachelorette party, I began to question the extent of her undisclosed experiences. Despite my doubts, part of me still believed our relationship was built on a solid foundation. Yet, another part of me was filled with doubts. I was overwhelmed with confusion and despair, making my life feel like it was falling apart. My stay with my coworker couldn't last forever, as I had work deadlines. My home was also where I stored tools and equipment. 2 days later, I needed to return home. I realized my responsibilities as a father and in my profession required me to be present. At that point, thoughts of divorce or separation hadn't entered my mind yet. I was still struggling to process everything that had happened. The emotional turmoil left me despondent. It caused a noticeable loss of appetite and a deep desire for someone to talk to. Throughout my life, my father had been a consistent source of support during difficult times. Despite my youthful defiance of his advice, with age, I became more willing to listen. I considered reaching out to him for guidance during this painful time. I made the decision to reach out to my father and disclose the troubling circumstances I was facing. His reaction was one of surprise, as he had not anticipated that my wife would exhibit such behavior. Although aware of her somewhat complicated history, my parents had developed a fondness for her. They believed she had a positive impact on my life and brought out the best in me. This perception stemmed from her ability to project a certain image to them. She was skilled at revealing only the aspects of her personality that she wanted others to see, leaving a favorable impression. Most people who knew her likely wouldn't consider her capable of such actions, except perhaps her close friends. They might have seen a less flattering side of her. My father, married to my mother for 36 years, offered insights based on his experience. He pointed out that relationships had changed significantly since his youth. In his day, women didn't have the same access to social media, which now amplifies interactions and provides validation from beyond one's immediate circle. This became more evident when I investigated my wife's social media presence. He advised me to return home and remain a stable presence for our children. He suggested approaching my wife with empathy to minimize her defensiveness. He encouraged me to consider reconciliation if she demonstrated a genuine willingness to make amends. He reminded me that the grass isn't always greener on the other side. If my wife deceived me, there was no guarantee that the next woman wouldn't do the same. He acknowledged that it would be hard to forget the betrayal, but if forgiveness was impossible, I needed to start thinking about my future. After the conversation with my father, I felt determined to confront the situation head-on when I returned home. When I arrived to take my daughters to school, my wife expressed a desire to talk privately. I told her we could discuss things later that evening. I noticed she had been crying, her eyes red and puffy. Despite her apparent distress, I found it hard to sympathize, as she hadn't yet admitted to any wrongdoing. That evening, I received a text from the acquaintance involved in this troubling situation. He claimed to have deleted his copy of the compromising footage and assured me he no longer had it. Without a way to verify, I had to take him at his word. I also informed him that I would send the legal documentation we had discussed. When I returned home later that evening, my wife was already there. I was mentally preparing myself for her to confess to her infidelity. I expected her to acknowledge the lies she had told throughout our relationship. Upon arriving, I found her sitting alone on the balcony, looking like a stranger to me. The idealized image I had of her was shattered. I had always believed that I was the only one with a troubled past, but at least I had taken responsibility for my actions. Her past seemed shrouded in secrecy. As I entered the house, I found her on the balcony, a place where we usually enjoyed warm summer evenings. She greeted me, but I didn't respond. I went inside, took a shower, and changed out of my work clothes. A few minutes later, I rejoined her on the balcony, holding a cold beer. We sat in silence for several moments. I wanted to give her the chance to speak first, to see if she would offer any further fabrications. I could tell she was expecting me to question her, but I let the silence linger. Eventually, she broke the silence, apologizing for her infidelity. She explained that it happened during a tumultuous phase of her life. She said that when our relationship began, she was unsure about its future and was still caught up in a party lifestyle. She claimed to regret her actions deeply and assured me she had remained faithful since then. I interrupted her, pressing for more clarification. I asked why she chose to engage in intimacy with multiple men on the same night she met them. I had spent months yearning for my partner to develop a deeper closeness with me, despite her repeated assertions that she was not ready for such intimacy. She said she wanted our first shared experience to be special and meaningful, unlike her prior encounters with dancers. These past experiences, she claimed, lacked any significance. Her explanation left me confused. I pointed out that she had engaged intimately with those dancers on the very first day we met. This raised a troubling question: why was I required to wait for something special, while she indulged in explicit behavior with strangers? I confronted her about whether there were any other affairs that hadn't been captured on video. She firmly insisted there were none. Yet, my skepticism persisted. She encouraged me to examine her phone and social media accounts, claiming she was truthful. My response was doubtful. If she had time to fabricate a narrative, she had time to erase evidence. Despite not expecting to uncover anything conclusive, I accepted her offer and gained access to her accounts. Though she had confessed to some extent, I remained convinced she hadn't disclosed everything. Doubt took root in my mind, eroding my trust in her. Despite this, I resolved to follow my father's advice and give our relationship another chance. However, that night, I couldn't share the same bedroom with her. I suggested she sleep in the guest room instead. The following day, despite my reluctance, the urge to scrutinize her social media accounts became overwhelming. I assumed she must have cleansed her profiles if she had anything to hide, yet thoughts of her interactions consumed me. Eventually, I logged into her accounts, combing through her messages. I realized how unhealthy this behavior was for me. Although her posts contained no explicit content, I was surprised by the volume of male attention she received. It became evident she was deleting messages to hide them from me. Notifications were set up, and by the time I tried to view a message, it had already been erased. Initially, I rationalized that attractive women often received attention, even if they didn't engage. Most of the men reaching out to her were from the Middle East and South Asia, which somewhat eased my concerns. A week later, our relationship remained strained, though we were communicating more than before. Despite her efforts to reconnect, we hadn't regained the closeness we once shared. She expressed frustration over my reluctance to move on. She suggested we see a marriage counselor, but I told her that talking to a third party wouldn't resolve the deep-seated issues from the affair. I remained unsure whether our marriage could survive. My obsessive surveillance of her social media and messages took a severe toll on my mental health, leading me to stop this unproductive behavior. However, stopping made me feel even worse, as the lack of trust lingered between us. I began feeling paranoid, convinced others were talking about my situation behind my back. One evening, while at a bar with friends, I noticed acquaintances socializing with the man who sold me the video of her indiscretions. The feeling of being watched intensified. I imagined them glancing in my direction and whispering among themselves, which felt deeply humiliating. Despite questioning whether my feelings were rooted in paranoia, the weight of the video loomed large. I suspected anyone I encountered was laughing at my predicament, leaving me grappling with depression, embarrassment, and anger. In the past, I would have confronted those who seemed to be mocking me. However, I recognized they were grown men behaving in a juvenile manner. I resolved to leave the bar early, seeking solace at home. Engaging in a confrontation would only bring further humiliation. It had been 2 weeks since D-Day, a critical turning point that profoundly impacted my marriage. During this period, I refrained from intimate relations with my wife. I was trying to sincerely engage in marriage counseling. My goal was to navigate the emotional turmoil and rebuild closeness. The memory of the affair lingered in my thoughts, creating an emotional barrier between us. My wife scheduled several counseling sessions, and we arranged for a babysitter to care for our children. We hoped these appointments would provide clarity. As we prepared for our first session, I felt anxious. I worried the therapist might blame me, based on stories I had heard. However, the therapist took a respectful and direct approach, particularly with my wife. The session resembled a comprehensive evaluation aimed at fostering honesty from my wife. It focused on rebuilding trust between us. As buried truths surfaced, I began to suspect additional incidents of infidelity. My instincts told me my wife wasn't disclosing everything. The therapist encouraged us to focus on reconciliation. Techniques were offered to help rebuild trust, but I remained unconvinced that reconciliation was possible. My wife seemed intent on controlling the narrative, selectively revealing information. By the third session, she appeared to lose interest, feeling under constant scrutiny. I was uncovering aspects of her character that made her uncomfortable. She suggested we switch therapists, a proposal I rejected. Subsequent sessions were marred by her excuses. She often arrived late, citing work obligations, and canceled appointments without notifying me. This behavior led me to believe she wasn't genuinely committed to taking responsibility. It had been 6 weeks since the affair came to light. Her lack of engagement in the counseling process only deepened my distress. I eventually spoke with the friend who had informed me about the video. I asked him how many people in our social circle knew about it. He revealed that many of our high school acquaintances were already aware. He shared that he stumbled upon the video by chance. Others who had made derogatory remarks recently were also aware of the video. This realization confirmed my suspicion that many people knew about it while I remained oblivious. The thought deeply embarrassed me. I confided in my wife about my discomfort with the video's circulation. She suggested relocating and expressed her willingness to change jobs. This intrigued me, as it seemed she might have contemplated relocating before I discovered the video. I began to suspect she knew about the rumors earlier. I considered reaching out to friends who appeared in the video. However, some were no longer on good terms with my wife. Others, still friends with her, might not be forthcoming with me. Attempts to contact them through social media yielded no responses, complicating my search for clarity. As I reflected on the emotional aftermath, 3 months had passed since D-Day. I eventually became intimate with my wife again. She had been making efforts to seduce me, and I succumbed to the moment. The act was driven more by frustration than by love. For the first time since discovering the video, she remained in the master bedroom the following night. However, when she attempted to initiate intimacy again, I resisted her advances. This was unusual behavior for me. My rejection prompted her frustration, as she was now willing to try things I had previously suggested. Despite her efforts, I remained indifferent. I couldn't muster the desire to reciprocate her advances. She made an effort to cuddle with me, but it felt more suffocating than comforting. After enduring that for another night, I realized I could no longer sleep peacefully in the same bed. I started sleeping on the couch, needing to reclaim my ability to rest. The next day, my wife expressed frustration over my suffering. She proposed giving me a hall pass for a year, allowing me to be with other women. However, I made it clear that this wouldn't solve our issues. The fact that she was intimate with others wasn't my concern. What I wanted was a deeper connection rooted in love, something I no longer felt was possible with her. For months into this turmoil, I reached out to my father, expressing doubts about forgiving my wife. I confided in him that I was contemplating a legal separation. He advised me to consider moving away for a couple of months, suggesting that time apart might bring clarity. After returning home, I told my wife about my plan. I informed her of my intention to find a nearby apartment so I could stay connected with our children. Despite her pleas to reconsider, I remained firm in my decision. A week later, I finalized a lease for a furnished studio apartment close to our home. Throughout this process, I wrestled with doubts about separating from my family. The thought of distancing myself from my children and leaving my wife weighed heavily on me. Although I wanted to stay in the relationship, I felt a temporary break would benefit my mental well-being. My plan wasn't to make the separation permanent but to focus on myself while retaining access to my work tools at home. The night before I moved, a serious confrontation erupted between us. My wife was visibly upset, arguing that she had given me space throughout this ordeal. She accused me of being unreasonable, claiming that my decision to leave was irrational. I reiterated that I needed time to process everything and proposed a 2-month separation. We agreed to work toward reconciliation, but after moving to my apartment, I felt a sense of relief. The first day was tough, though, as my wife had told our 5-year-old daughter that I had abandoned them. This deeply troubled me. When I took my daughters to school, my daughter told me about her mother's tears. I assured my daughter that I hadn't abandoned her or her sister, emphasizing that I was still there for them. After dropping them off, I called my wife, expressing disappointment over her attempt to manipulate our children. I urged her not to involve them in our marital issues. She refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing. She insisted that she couldn't lie because, in her view, I had abandoned them. I reminded her that the only change was my absence from the home, while I continued fulfilling all my parental responsibilities. The next day, I took the children to school again, and they seemed to be in good spirits. After work and visiting a client's job site, I returned to my apartment and avoided social interactions. I didn't want to encounter anyone who might have seen the distressing video of my wife, which had become a source of embarrassment. My wife and I discussed relocating if we reconciled, but for now, I focused on my day-to-day responsibilities. We didn't see each other face-to-face for the rest of the week, but we spoke regularly on the phone, mainly about our children's schedules. Occasionally, she dropped off meals at my apartment, adding a sense of normalcy. The time apart felt relatively stress-free, offering me a much-needed respite from arguments and emotional turmoil, providing me with a much-needed respite akin to a partial vacation. The prospect of returning home lingered in my mind, particularly as I anticipated the end of this trying phase in my life. I considered moving back in with my wife and children but recognized the need for personal reflection. I knew this required time apart. Many of my friends partake in week-long hunting trips every season. One such trip was scheduled for the upcoming month, and I received an invitation to join. In previous years, I had often deferred participation due to my wife's objections. While the costs can be significant, my friend had secured a group discount, making the trip more accessible. Although there was still a month until the hunting trip, I purchased my ticket in advance. The logistics would be convenient, as we would travel in my friend's RV, promising camaraderie and enjoyment. This adventure offered a glimmer of excitement amid the difficulties I was encountering. It became a focal point to look forward to during this challenging period. In the weeks that followed, my life adhered to a monotonous routine. However, the pattern shifted dramatically one week when I received a call from my wife. She informed me that the dishwasher had malfunctioned and asked if I could assist in repairing it. Upon arriving at the house, I was taken aback by the changes in the living room. My visits to the house had been infrequent and brief. I typically accessed the basement through a separate entrance, bypassing the main living area altogether. As I set about fixing the dishwasher, I noticed that my wife had redecorated significantly. She had changed the curtains and acquired a new couch. Curiosity compelled me to ask about the changes. My wife explained that she wanted to refresh the home environment. After completing the dishwasher repair, I gathered some belongings from the master bedroom. I was surprised to find new outfits that my wife had purchased. She explained her motivation stemmed from a desire to enhance her physique and embark on a journey of self-improvement. Although I acknowledged the importance of personal growth, I couldn't ignore a pang of jealousy. She was bettering herself while I grappled with uncertainties about my decisions. A part of me began to wonder if these changes signaled her moving on from our shared life. As days passed, I wrestled with doubts about my choice to distance myself. 2 weeks later, as temperatures dropped, my wife contacted me again about an issue with the furnace. Upon my visit, I noticed more alterations to the home. I hadn't seen her up close since the dishwasher repair, but now I could see she had lost weight. When I complimented her, she attributed it to her commitment to self-improvement. This left me with a lingering sense that she was no longer inclined to welcome me back into our shared life. It became clear that my role in her life had shifted. While I continued fulfilling my responsibilities for the children and contributed financially, I sensed she was content without the emotional connections we once had. I decided to inform my wife about my upcoming hunting trip to Montana. I expected her to express concern or hesitation, perhaps about the dangers or costs involved. To my surprise, she neither objected nor asked questions. Her nonchalant demeanor left me feeling unsettled. It seemed as though she had reached a point of indifference towards my return, exacerbating my feelings of uncertainty. Fast forward 2 weeks, I embarked on the hunting trip with my friends. Upon returning, I picked up our daughters for school. As I parked the car, their expressions were filled with joy at seeing me. However, a peculiar comment from my 5-year-old daughter caught me off guard. She asked if they were going to have a new daddy. This strange inquiry prompted me to reassure her that I wasn't going anywhere. When I asked where this concern came from, she explained that a man had been staying at the house during my absence. At first, I assumed she had misunderstood a visit from my brother-in-law, who had stayed with us before. But she was familiar with him and insisted that this man's name was Jacob, a name that was entirely unfamiliar to me. Access to my wife's social media accounts and text messages had been completely obstructed. She had changed her passwords following my departure from our shared home. The name Jacob occupied my mind incessantly for the remainder of that day. I struggled to recall if my wife had ever mentioned him before my hunting trip. Upon reflection, it became evident that my wife's enthusiasm for reconciliation had noticeably waned. She seemed to desire my presence merely to achieve the semblance of fixing our relationship. My thoughts began to drift toward alarming possibilities, particularly the unsettling notion that my daughter might have been telling the truth, that there was indeed a man named Jacob involved with my wife. I considered that if I expressed any uncertainty regarding Jacob, it might lead my wife to deny any knowledge of him. This was similar to her previous denials in response to the video footage that had raised suspicions. With this in mind, I resolved to visit her that evening while the children were asleep. I intended to surprise her with an unannounced appearance. Though I expected her to be taken aback, she did not seem surprised, perhaps anticipating my arrival given my recent trips out of town. While our interactions maintained a cordial tone, there was a palpable sense that our efforts toward reconciliation were losing momentum. Possessing keys to the house allowed me to enter without announcing my presence. Upon seeing me, my wife inquired if I was hungry. I declined her offer, clearly stating that I wanted to have a conversation. We situated ourselves in the living room, and I confronted her directly about my knowledge of Jacob and the affair. I scrutinized her body language, hoping to gauge her true reaction. Her nervous mannerisms suggested my suspicions had merit. She soon raised her head and explained that Jacob was a coworker with whom she had developed a close working relationship. She asserted that, since I had not been available, she reached out to him for help with household chores. My probing continued as I questioned whether this assistance extended to sharing our bedroom. Her unsettling look suggested more than she was willing to admit. When I raised my voice, demanding clarity, she confessed to having slept with Jacob on 2 occasions, claiming nothing more had occurred. Deep down, I found it hard to believe her claim of only 2 encounters. The gravity of the situation led me to suspect that this was merely the tip of the iceberg. When I pressed her for the duration of this relationship, she initially attempted to deflect. She claimed that if I had not left her and the children, this situation would not have arisen. This evasion only intensified my suspicions, prompting me to demand a direct answer. She finally admitted they had been emotionally involved for over a year. She revealed that the relationship had recently taken a physical turn. I reminded her of my earlier concerns during our marriage counseling sessions when I had suspected something was amiss. The therapist had seen through her fabrications and urged her to disclose the truth. In retrospect, it became increasingly clear that I had perhaps been deceived throughout our marriage. I grappled with the realization that our relationship had been built on an unstable foundation. I found myself contemplating the extent of their affair, drawing from my knowledge of infidelity. A woman who had engaged in multiple encounters during a bachelorette party would not likely remain satisfied with the ordinary nature of our relationship. I doubted her claim that physical intimacy only occurred during my absences. I sensed that her narrative was incomplete. Given her prolonged involvement with Jacob, I inquired how she envisioned our path to reconciliation. Her failure to correct my implication indicated that there was undoubtedly more to their connection than she had admitted. When I asked about her feelings for Jacob, a brief hesitation flickered across her demeanor, raising my suspicions further. I rose from the couch, asserting that it was time to cease the pretense. I pointed out that a woman who had shared intimacy with 2 dancers and displayed such behavior in front of others would hardly confine her actions to a single occurrence. Expressing relief that she was finding happiness with this man, I articulated that I now had significant reasons to pursue legal separation. I acknowledged the meaningful moments we had shared throughout our marriage and the joy our 2 beautiful daughters had brought into our lives. However, it became increasingly clear that it was time to officially conclude our union. In the past, I often questioned the wisdom of my decision to move out of the household shared with my wife. However, I have since come to the conclusion that it was the right choice. It granted her the opportunity to confront her mistakes. Had I stayed and accepted her fabrications and emotional manipulation, I might have remained ignorant of the reality that had been hidden from me. I must acknowledge the marriage therapist who played a crucial role in my awakening. While she didn't explicitly inform me that my wife was deceptive, I could discern the nuances in her questions. It was as if I was learning from individuals adept at dissembling, and I was absorbing the lessons. This experience revealed that my wife was skilled at obscuring her actions, leading me to suspect that she was withholding even more from me. As the therapy session concluded and I prepared to leave, my wife expressed her lingering affection for me. I chose to ignore her words, turning my back and walking away. The journey home was fraught with emotion. I felt deep sadness, knowing I wouldn't be able to spend as much time with my children as I desired. While I recognized that there was no reversing the course I had taken, an unexpected sense of relief washed over me. For the first time, I felt validated in my understanding of my wife's true nature as a disloyal partner. It's unsettling how accurately the adage about cheaters reflected my reality. That night, despite my usual doubts, I found peace in my sleep. It felt as though the universe was revealing the truth to me. Events had unfolded in a way that systematically exposed the deceit in which I had been entangled for 6 years. I pondered the pivotal moment when my friend told me about the video. Without that revelation, the series of events that followed may never have happened, leaving me unaware of who my wife truly was. The following day, I reached out to my father to share everything I had uncovered. He reassured me, commending my handling of the situation. He emphasized that I shouldn't hold myself accountable for these circumstances. His words about how everything happens for a reason brought comfort to me and highlighted the importance of bringing hidden truths to light. As I navigated the fallout from my marriage, my foremost concern became the safety and well-being of my daughters. I felt an urgent need to uncover the identity of the man my wife had introduced to them. I was aware of troubling narratives about individuals who pursue relationships with single mothers for nefarious purposes. The thought of any harm coming to my children was intolerable. In the routine of picking my children up from school, my wife initiated a conversation to discuss our increasingly complex situation. She expressed her desire to reconcile and promised to sever ties with the other man. I reminded her that she had been involved with him for an extended period, indicating that this was more complicated than she was portraying. For the first time, she countered my assertion, claiming that the relationship had only recently turned physical after I left home. I recognized this as an attempt to shift the blame, and I wasn't persuaded. I pointed out the contradiction in her actions. While we had been working toward reconciliation, she chose to engage in a physical relationship and invited this man into our home. Rather than seeking retribution, I decided that the most prudent course of action would be to pursue a divorce and focus on the well-being of our daughters. It was clear that she had abandoned our marriage long before I left. In response, she reverted to blaming me for leaving, a tactic I found unproductive. I chose to end the call to avoid escalating the argument. Despite her physical allure, I realized that she would likely have no difficulty attracting another partner, possibly one more suitable than myself. For the sake of my daughters, I hoped she would find someone better. The worst scenario would be her engaging with random men in our home, jeopardizing our children's safety. The following day, I decided to reach out to one of my wife's colleagues. This person had known her for 2 years through their work at the hospital and a previous institution. I approached the call unexpectedly, presenting a narrative that I had suffered a work-related injury and was in need of a male physical therapist. I mentioned that my wife recommended someone named Jacob, hoping to gain some insight from her colleague. She responded by stating that she did not know anyone by the name of Jacob, and the only individual she could recall with that name was a former client of my wife's from her previous employment. After expressing my gratitude to her for her clarification, I concluded the call. It then struck me that my inquiry had been somewhat misleading, and there was a possibility that she might later discuss my question with my wife. This prompted me to take immediate action. I resolved to confront my wife regarding her apparent deception about Jacob's true identity. I felt an urgency to address the matter in person, as the uncertainty of when her coworker might contact her to relay the details of our unusual conversation lingered. Therefore, I promptly reached out to my wife to seek clarity on the situation. I directly questioned her about the alleged falsehood concerning the identity of her supposed affair partner, specifically mentioning that Jacob had been her client for over 2 years. I asserted my right to be informed, emphasizing that I needed to be certain that she was not bringing unknown individuals and potential threats into our lives and around our daughters. In response, she insisted that Jacob was not a dangerous individual, asserting that he was a widower and a businessman who owned several hotels in the vicinity. She described him as a clean and trustworthy person she had known for many years, explaining that he had been her client following the tragic death of his wife. She indicated that there had been a mutual chemistry between them. However, she maintained that she had refrained from pursuing any relationship due to her marital commitments. Nevertheless, she claimed that once I had exited their lives, she felt compelled to explore the possibility of a relationship with him. Remarkably, her response included an attempt to shift some of the blame onto me, while simultaneously acknowledging her own culpability in the situation. Following my conversation with her coworker, I developed a strong suspicion that my wife had engaged in a physical relationship with one of her wealthier former clients for a significant duration, potentially exceeding 2 years. In light of the circumstances, I decided it prudent to conduct a background check on Jacob. Fortunately, my investigation revealed that he did not appear to have any criminal history. While I would be remiss if I did not admit to feeling a degree of envy toward this man, given his apparent success compared to my own, I also recognized the critical importance of uncovering the truth about my wife's ongoing secretive affairs, particularly in the aftermath of the incident involving the Bachelorette. It became imperative for me to initiate a fresh start. As I considered the potential implications, some might suggest exploring the option of a DNA test for my daughters. However, I did not believe it was necessary since they bore a strong resemblance to me. To condense the timeline, 2 months later, my wife and I finalized our divorce, and I sold our shared home, distributing the proceeds fairly. She subsequently moved in with her affair partner, who owned multiple properties, although his primary residence was located a mere 50 meters away from where I lived. As for myself, I relocated to a different city in pursuit of a new beginning. I secured a better-paying job and rented a condominium that provided ample space for my work equipment. Despite the challenges associated with adjusting to a new environment and establishing contracts, I embraced this opportunity with optimism. Although I missed the routine of taking my children to daycare every day, we established a shared custody arrangement that allowed me to spend time with my daughters every other week. Life post-divorce has not proven to be as tumultuous as I initially anticipated. The custody arrangement has afforded me the time to engage in my hobbies and personal interests. To date, I have not pursued dating, as my focus has been primarily directed toward my work, and I do not foresee entering into a long-term relationship in the near future.